Hello, everybody, and welcome to Radio Dead Air Tech Q&A. You've got questions, we've got guesses. I'm Nash. I've been doing this forever. But in addition to streaming, I'm also an IT professional. With me, as always, my producer, Mike Gehrman, also works in the dark arts of IT. If you have tech questions, by all means, fire them away. Send them to request@radiodeadair.com, or you can put them in the comments on our YouTube. That's viable as well. Let's see. Gotta make sure I'm on the right account for the YouTube so I can check the comments there. Let's see. All right. So how are you doing, Mike?
Oh, we switched cell phone providers at work this last week. So next week, the new cell phone provider decided, oh no, you can't keep all those iPhones that you have. You've got to replace them with our iPhones. I want you to guess how many iPhones that is.
Several, at least 100, if not more.
You are off by an order of magnitude.
1,000? 1,000 iPhones you have to swap out because of these cell phone. Over 1,000 because of this cell phone provider. Why aren't you allowed to say no, eat it?
I don't know.
Because it's like, no, we're giving you our money. We have iPhones. Fucking use them.
It may be that the previous provider has them locked or something. I don't know.
That could be. Yeah, a lot of them do that locking with the iPhone. They're supposed to be regular, or at least they're trying. The FCC is trying to do regulation where phones are going to unlock after 90 days, I believe, is what they're trying to do, no matter what. So, well, good luck to you. We got some news. You know what? You're having a bad week. You cannot be having as bad a week or bad as month or bad as couple of weeks as Intel is having.
This is at least our fourth week on Intel. This same problem.
Not just the same problem. There's another one popped up too. We'll talk about this first, then we'll talk about the other shit because there's more. There's even more. Okay, so first of all, there's a class action suit forming over the defects in Intel's 13th and 14th generation processors.
And I believe we said at least 2 weeks ago that there was probably going to be one.
Oh, yeah. But I guess what I found out today, Gamers Nexus has been all over this. By the way, if you don't follow them on YouTube, you definitely should. Excellent streamers, excellent videos and reporting and tons of reviews. Fantastic. Here's what new development. I've been under the impression that this was only affecting the i7s and i9s. That's the 13700, 13900.
But apparently it's any Raptor Lake CPU.
Any Raptor Lake CPU, 65 watts and up, which is the i5s. Now, fortunately, if you couldn't afford a great CPU and you're stuck with like a 13100, guess what? That's not actually a Raptor Lake CPU. That's the previous gen. That's a 12th gen that's been rebranded as a 13th gen. So you're fine.
You're okay. Yeah, you're fine. You're okay, except for the fact that, of course, you're on that CPU.
Yeah, the 13100. If you have a 13100, you're absolutely fine.
And this also doesn't apply to mobile processors.
Yet. I will note that Gamers Nexus has had a couple of reports from people saying, my laptop has stability issues. They're buying those laptops from those viewers to run tests on them to see if that is the case.
Because I will say that I have a couple work laptops that are 13th gen. I want to say at least i7s, but maybe i9s, that are also having stability issues. I cannot sell them to Gamers Nexus. For reasons.
Reasons. Because it's the biggest problem here is not just the scope of what we're looking at. Not just who it affects, but it's mainly Intel's response to it. It's been insufficient. From the very start, when they tried to give new guidelines for power usage without actually giving guidelines to give themselves plausible deniability, it was so awkward. Trying to put all this off on motherboard manufacturers, them being the problem when it wasn't. It's actually them. They won't give serial numbers. They won't give, for the oxidation issue part of it, they won't give a date range on when those CPUs might be damaged. They're trying to treat tray and box CPUs differently. If you're not familiar with this, there are two ways to get Intel CPUs. You get it in a nice blue box in a store or from Newegg or something. Those are called box CPUs. Those are consumer-facing ones that's got the little booklet in there. Sometimes you get a cooler depending on what level of CPU you got. And then there's trays. And trays are typically sold to OEMs and system builders.
And of course, the reason they're sold this way is not because they're any different. It's so they take up less shelf space.
Mm. They're exactly the same. They just don't have all the documentation and the packaging. And they're just put a nice little plastic tray, and they put like a ton of them in trays and ship them out to, say, you know, your Dells, your HPs, NZXTs, those people. When they build a system, they get trays of CPUs. If you, let's say you have a HP with one of these, like an Omen or something with one of these chips in it. Well, this isn't covered by normal warranty, apparently, because you didn't buy it from a store. You have to go through HP for it. HP hasn't gotten any guidance on this. None of the OEM system builders have got guidance on this. In fact, quite a few of them are frustrated, and they're expressing their frustration to Gamers Nexus. This is a giant cluster.
Yep. And Intel's just not making it any better.
To compound this, and this is actually surprisingly unrelated to this huge ass problem they're having with their current generation of CPUs, or most recent, I should say, not current, but most recent.
Yeah.
Intel.
Put it another way, Nash. The 9 o'clock screw up is completely different from the 7 o'clock screw up.
Because Intel threw so much into their foundry business and it's not providing returns. This last week, Intel announced they were laying off 15,000 of their employees, a tenth of their workforce. In addition, they're also doing things like they have halted dividends on the stock.
Which caused to plummet.
Oh yeah, it dropped 30% this week. Intel stock went right off 30% of their value in a day.
Yeah,
that's
like the reason it happened. Reason it happened is primarily because they said we're not putting out a dividend. Stocks often drop a little bit after a dividend is issued because, hey, you're not going to get another dividend anytime soon. So they drop. You've got your dividend. It drops a little bit. That's normal. Yeah. This is purely, we're not doing a dividend for a while, a long while. If it had if it had just been, hey, to restructure and cut costs, we're going to lay off 15,000 people. Wall Street traditionally replies to that with, oh yeah, we'll raise your stock will go up a little bit. People, that's fine.
Yeah. But if no dividend, that means things are bad. They are reviewing projects and trying to find stuff that's not efficient or wasteful, or they're combining divisions. One of the things I'm concerned about, just simply for competition in the marketplace, is we were all looking forward to Battle Mage, the next video cards from Intel, because supposedly Battle Mage was going to bring it not better than anybody else, but it's going to bring into parity on the entry level graphics cards with some decent pricing there to maybe put a little pressure on AMD and NVIDIA. And we don't know if there's going to, what's the C supposed to be? Because A was Alchemist. That was the first generation. Battle Mage is the second. C is, I forget what the C stands for, but that's going to be the third generation. Are they going to get to the third generation of Intel's video cards? That Celestial, that's the one that people were thinking Intel might get really hardcore. By the time they get to Celestial, they might get their feet under them. Because let's face it, Battle Mage wasn't going to be blowing the doors off, but it was going to be something, price to performance wise, it was going to be something notable. Celestial might not even happen if things keep going at Intel. Oh, and people pointed out that while 15,000 people were cut, the CEO of Intel went from $11 million last year to $16 million this year.
He the C-class suite never pays the penalty for these screw-ups.
But Mike, they are having to restrict the use of the corporate jet.
Now, I say that maybe the C-class, the C-level person over the CPU bugs might take it. A pay cut or a firing. We've restructured it. You were responsible for the department that screwed all this stuff up. So you're going to go and we're going to put Steve in charge.
They're cutting the free fruit and complimentary seltzer for the employees at the commissary.
Offer not available in Intel Scotland.
They could have just, lumped that in with we're making cuts. No, they felt the need to announce that. They felt the need to announce, no, we're going to screw you specifically just a little bit because you need to know we're doing.
There was a guy who was like, I'm starting a diet on Monday. I'm going to make use of the free fruit. And then he goes, screw it. Donuts it is.
So these two situations combined, first of all, Intel's not going anywhere. Just get that out of your mind right now.
Yeah, the disasters would have to be significantly larger for the company to start sinking hard.
Intel represents too much of the market in terms of servers and workstations. They are the main CPU. AMD has gained some market share. That's true. They've gained significant market share over the past few years, but they're still at maybe 20, 30%, which is huge. They used to be at something like 10% and under, but gaining still, Intel is the player in x86 CPUs. Now they are facing competition from ARM now. Yep. They are also having
ARM is looking the who does ARM? That's just lost the name of the company.
Qualcomm?
Hey. Qualcomm, yes. Qualcomm wants to make them, says, hey, now that ARM is producing some pretty decent PCs, let's make them cheaper.
Yeah, it's not going to replace like workstations or servers. Well, in some cases.
No, it's going to replace it. Where ARM is going to take a huge bite out of stuff is your generic office seat, like the person who does just office products, like Word, Excel, etc.
Because they don't need to have gaming power.
Yeah, and maybe some of the school stuff where they're going, we're getting a better deal from Qualcomm/ARM than we are with the Chromebooks. Let's go with this.
And those will run Windows too, because Microsoft is working on a version of Windows that will run with all this stuff. So Intel is facing competition, but make no mistake, they are where they are. They are here. They are the largest player in the market. It's not to say something dramatically bad can't happen to cause them to crash, but the response that they made this week to pull back, cut their costs, and free up revenue, they will be fine. It's just they're going to kind of hurt right now. To add a little bit of just the insult to injury, we found out why AMD recalled those CPUs before the initial launch of the 9000 series.
When he says we, Nash is talking about himself and the mouse in his pocket, because I'm just hearing about this now.
You can't even. It's because there was a misprint on some of the CPUs. They were listing the Ryzen 5s and Ryzen 7s as Ryzen 9s. So you would have like the Ryzen 9 9600 and the Ryzen 9 9700, and that was why. It was a misprint on the heatsink.
Literally nothing wrong with the chip.
Nothing at all.
The screen printing, whatever process they put to put a label on there, was wrong.
Yeah, somebody screwed up and used 9 too often. And so like tons, instead of just the Ryzen...
Classic copy-paste error.
Instead of just the 9900 and the 9950 being labeled Ryzen 9s, all of them were labeled Ryzen 9s, which there's nothing wrong. They just have to take them back and reprint them.
Yeah, and honestly, that's the kind of thing you sit there and go, well, at least ours aren't pulling a whole bunch of extra voltage and damaging things. We just got to talk to Steve about his inability to know what numbers other than 9 are.
Thanks, Steve.
Steve goes, I know zeros too. It said 9900. No, Steve, you're missing the point.
But Intel is not the only tech company right now that's seeing some issues. Microsoft had some really incredible quarterly numbers, and not incredible in a good way.
No, incredibly bad.
Console sales 42% year-on-year drop in Xbox X, Series X and S sales. Yeah. Holy shit.
What I'm unclear on, see, this is hardware revenues / unit sales. Okay, so it doesn't include games. So there could be games that are still selling fine.
Oh, the games, yeah. I mean,
the console, no one's going like, I really need this console now.
Yeah, games and Game Pass are going great, but in terms of just the console, the problem is they've put too much focus on Game Pass, which allows for a whole lot of play anywhere mechanics, and not enough on first-party exclusives or third-party exclusives for the actual Xbox console. Meanwhile, Sony...
I think part of that is because there's been a little bit of pushback from game developers on making things exclusive. When they go, well, if we don't make it exclusive, you give us this much money to make it exclusive. But if we don't make it exclusive, we actually make this much money because the PC gamers want it too.
This is part of why Microsoft has made the rounds buying up game studios, because Sony did the same thing, specifically to release exclusives like Horizon Zero Dawn and the Spider-Man games, and those are under Sony's umbrella because, and eventually they get to PC, but for a long while they have a lock on the PS5. Xbox doesn't have that. Xbox doesn't have those titles that are exclusive to the Xbox. Well, okay, I take that back. They had one. Starfield.
Yeah, I mean, that's a hell of a game to hang all put all your eggs in a basket on.
Here's the thing. When I thought Starfield was going to be so good. And here's why. Because so much was riding on it. I thought Microsoft, with all they were going to put into this, with all what they were counting on this to sell Xboxes, they would never let Bethesda release a half-done, half-ass effort that would be lackluster. It was going to be great. They would never let that happen. And then they did.
Yeah.
It's like, if it had been the Elder Scrolls or something, maybe we'd be talking, but Starfield, it just laid there like a dead fish. This is, I don't know what this means generally. I mean, it's going to be weird, but it will feel like Sony is going to take over the living room with the PS5.
Yeah. Probably.
And Microsoft, of course, is going to own PC gaming because no matter Linux, they try Linux, and they've improved it, but Windows is still king when it comes to PC gaming because they don't have to run the abstraction layer, though it has gotten a lot better on Steam. And then when it comes to portables, while the Steam Deck has caught up a lot, Nintendo still rules the day. So it feels like there's just this segmentation of where each of the gaming companies are focused. And we're not, the idea of having console competition, having, a back. Are we going to just end up with one, like a PS6 and then nothing from Microsoft? Is that what we're going to happen?
It might happen.
Like, wow. Like Nintendo doing its own damn thing.
I think Intel and Microsoft need to have their bean counters, respectively, have their heads examined to see if there's an echoing sound inside.
Also, who needs to have their heads examined if there's an echoing sound inside?
JD Vance?
NZX. Okay, yes, but NZXT, because they have come up with a scheme. There's no other way to classify it.
I partially agree on this. I partially agree on scheme, but I partially don't, and I'll tell you why as we go into the article.
NZXT is set to rent a gaming computer to you at a cost of $2,000 a year.
Yep.
What?
Okay, so it is a cancel anytime sort of deal. So you could say, I've rented it for 6 months. I decided I don't want it anymore, which is not necessarily great, but it is there. You're not locked in for 2 years, which is good in the rental business because so often you are. What I think happened here is that NZXT picked up some bean counters from HP or Dell or someone who has made a huge business out of renting corporate office computers to various companies and government agencies where they say, hey, here's your corporate computer. You pay this much rent on it every month. And every 3 years, we replace it with a brand new computer that is an upgrade. Which is what this sort of is, because I can't believe that they're going to sit at these specs for the entire 2 years. Like a year from now, the spec for, there's 3 specs they give: a low spec, a medium spec, and a high spec.
But
I suspect the high spec will become the medium spec in a year or so, and there'll be a new high spec.
But if you save that $2,000, instead of just giving it to them,
you can have your own computer.
Better computer. It's not just a matter of you own your own. It's $2,000 for a system with that. That's no. You get a better system.
Here's the other potential advantage. Now, again, we don't have their marketing material on this, what the warranty is on this, what they cover. But I feel like if you're renting it and it breaks, they have to replace it. Now, obviously, if it broke because you spilled orange juice into it, that's on you. But if it breaks just because it's an Intel 13th gen processor and it decided to eat itself, and you go, hey, Intel 13th gen processor, and they go, yeah, they replace it.
Okay, here's
and in
why.
that case, you're not out the money. They are.
But number one, that's still a warranty thing that should be covered under every other warranty. And right, two...
But remember, warranties generally aren't 2 years on your computer equipment. And your rental may extend, well, I won't send the warranty, but it'll extend, hey, my computer broke, I need you to replace it. And they go, yeah, $25 shipping fee, $50 shipping fee. Here you go, done. Already made that old box back to us.
And here's the problem. That's fine for a TV or for a couch or even a car. But you put your life on a computer.
Yes, they need certainly have some data transfer options when you're swapping out computers.
Not even just your entire life is on a computer, and we have seen these companies the kind of failures
that come back. Yes.
Oh yes, we have seen the privacy failures from companies like this.
Do you know how we handle that at work?
Huh?
Because we're doing seat refresh, which is basically this: we get new computers, we go to the user, go, here's your new computer, we're swapping your data over. I've had users ask me, well, I've got some stuff on here that I don't want other people to see. And I'm like, when you say you don't want other people to see it, do you mean it would get you in trouble here at work? No, tax information. Fine. We pull the hard drives, they go to a hammer mill and they get destroyed. Obviously, NZXT is probably not doing that but they should have a wipe policy. They should have a guarantee on a wipe policy, and it should be part of the process where it says, if we turn out to have not wiped the drive and we leak your personal data, we owe you lots of money. And if they don't say that, then when it does happen, they will get sued.
Just in terms of the value proposition for this and what you're trusting, because even I couldn't imagine putting my tax information on a work computer. I literally could not.
I don't necessarily understand it either, but
any computer that will have any of my private information on it will be in my control, cannot be taken back by a repo man. All right. So, can you imagine a repo man showing up and taking the computer and it's got your search history on it?
You say that, I say that people do it on the work computers because we have a category of information known as PII. Personally identifiable information. I have to take PII training every year. And so does everyone at work. And that's why we destroy the hard drives. And when I say we, I don't mean that the computers go away and the hard drives get pulled by someone else out of sight and they promise us they've been destroyed. The hard drives get pulled from our machines at work before they get returned to the vendor. We will have boxes and boxes of hard drives, and then someone will go into the hammer mill.
Let me I'd say, if you're even considering this is a terrible deal.
It's not great.
You would be better off getting a credit card and buying a computer and paying it off.
Let me interject there. A real credit card, not one of those ones with like 39% interest.
Yeah. It's a real, because you would be so much better off that way. Because this is no. All right. Now it is on to the questions for this week. If you have some, let's see. We have any room for any more come in tonight? I don't think so. There's nothing on the email. And anything on YouTube? No, nothing. All right. So it's just these three. All right, let's see. Let's start with Carrie in New Mexico. Hi, Nash and Mike. I'm finally taking the plunge on a used 5900X CPU off of eBay for about $200. Which seems like a deal to me compared to $300 for a used 1500X 3D. It's debatable depending on use case, but I mean, yeah, that's the 5900X for a 5900X for $200. That's a 12 core. 24 thread CPU for $200. Anyway, I have an old Asus TUF Gaming B450 Plus 2, and I've never updated the BIOS because I've never done it before, and everything was working fine with my 3600, but everything I've checked online says it needs an update before I can use the 5900X.
True.
I've got the manual out, and there are two ways to update my BIOS. One is going through the BIOS itself and running the update option. The other is to use the BIOS Flashback USB slot on the back of my motherboard. Which is one is safer / better? Is there any difference? My research has led me to horror stories on Reddit, and I know if I do this wrong, I can brick my motherboard. Thank you, Carrie in New Mexico. Okay.
I will say that bricking is rather rare these days. Still possible, but it's rare.
It's rare. It used to be back in the day, you had to be super extra fucking careful with trying to update your BIOS.
As to which one is safer, better, I'd say the USB one is certainly easier. But I think they're about the same. Now,
well, the reason that slot exists and the flashback option and the button on the back of it, I looked it up. It's got a little button. You hold it down for 3 seconds, and then it just copies the BIOS off the USB stick that you plugged into. There's one specific slot for it. The reason that exists is specifically, there were instances where you can't boot your system with a newer CPU because you have yet to update the BIOS, and the system it won't boot because the BIOS doesn't recognize the new CPU yet. So the slot on the back, the thing that does that, it exists there to allow you to update the BIOS without actually having to turn the computer on. You have to plug it into power, but you don't actually have to hit the on switch. So, and it doesn't have to have RAM or CPU actually installed in the motherboard yet either. It just has to have wall power. That's it. Not even turned on wall power, just connected to wall power.
So I would certainly use the flashback option. That seems to be the easiest.
It is the easiest way, but yeah, you know, honestly, I'm not sure if it's better. I do know it's fast. It takes place in about, well, I don't know how fast booting it up and doing it is, but the flashback option, it takes place in about 20 seconds, if that. Just the little light flashes and flashes and flashes, and when it stops flashing and turns off, you're done. That's it. Simple as can be. Of course, if the light comes on and stays on, that means it didn't work. That's the only difference. Doesn't tell you why, though. But bricking the motherboard is hard to do now. Like Mike said, not impossible, but it's a lot harder than it used to be. Mainly because of situations like this. People would brick their motherboard, and it would have to go back to the manufacturer, who were the only ones who had the tools to actually redo the BIOS, and it was expensive for them. So they put in a lot of safety precautions like backup BIOSes and ways to ensure the system will boot no matter what. Even if, there are some systems now with UEFI BIOS. UEFI BIOS, yeah. The UEFI BIOS system that will ensure, even if you've made a mess, it will make sure the computer can boot. It will unscrew the BIOS and be like, look, this is all messed up, so we're going to take it from like this backup copy we had and make sure it can boot. Oh, yeah, Raritor's right. After updating the BIOS, the PC might reboot a few times, so you have to be patient and wait for it to finish the entire process. What it's doing there is things like memory training and detecting the parts that are connected to it. And then it will come up and say, okay, you need to hit F1 and go into the BIOS and actually set things up for the first time. But, yeah, if you have your manual out, which I would say, that's a good that's a good instinct. The trouble is it's not very detailed in there. I looked.
Manuals generally aren't. Okay, I'm going to give a quick seg on about manuals right now.
Okay.
I have a part at work that's not working the way I think it should, and I looked in the manual. See, because it involves DisplayPort, and it's a DisplayPort feature that's only available on DisplayPort 1.2. And I looked in the manual of this component to see, are you DisplayPort 1.2 compatible? And of course, the manual doesn't say. It just says, yeah, there's DisplayPort on this thing. I had to Google search and go, well, Reddit knows, but Reddit is blocked at work. Phone. Yes, it is 1.2. So it is not the component in and of itself that for me is not working. But I couldn't tell you that from the manual.
Oh, another thing to make sure of when you do this, and this is no matter which way you do this, the USB stick has to be formatted FAT32. You can't have it be GPT
NTFS.
Or anything else. Yeah, NTFS. It has to be FAT32. That's the only file system that these will recognize. So if you try to, it has to be FAT32. That's so. All right. Next up, this is from Stormbreaker DX. Hey guys, consider this your stupid question for the week. Okie dokie. I think I've heard you and other people say that 16 gigabytes is the minimum RAM these days. That's about right. Yeah. It's not like the system won't boot with 8, but 16 is the reason why we and pretty much generally the industry considers 16 the minimum is price to the price has hit the point where you're kind of dumb not to put 16 in there.
Yeah.
And
you're going to see performance hits below 16 just because the operating system wants so much. Every program you're doing is one. And there's no such thing. There's rarely such a thing as a new version of this program that I use has come out, and it uses less memory.
Yeah, that's rare as hell.
I mean, it might make more efficient use of memory, but it's not really using less.
Is there an issue with too much RAM? Is there a point where putting too much RAM in your computer starts being detrimental, or does the computer not care? I was thinking about maybe getting 64 gigs when I build my new system this fall. Stormbreaker DX.
Okay, so 64 is going to be fine. You're not going to have any. You're not going to really run into any problems as long as your RAM all matches. There are two limits, more or less. First is what the processor will address. Some processors will not, even though some documentation somewhere might say something otherwise. Some processors go, no, I really can't address more memory than this.
If we're talking a new system these days, I think like 256 gigs.
Yeah. But the other thing is the motherboard may not allow you to address more than a certain amount. So you got to look at both those limits, and whichever one is lower, that's the one you can use.
I don't think putting in the maximum amount of RAM is not necessarily detrimental, but let's say your motherboard has 2 RAM slots, put it as much as you want. You're never going to see an issue. If your motherboard has 4 RAM slots, that's when we get a little tricky. Those slots, even though there are 4 of them, there's still only 2 banks of RAM. And 2 of those sticks will be tied together as a single bank. There's only 2 slots. Yeah, and the other 2 sticks will be another bank. So if you only have 2 slots in your motherboard, that's 1 slot per bank. But with 4 slots, you have 2 slots per bank. And that's when things can get a little weird. Because when you fill all 4 slots, sometimes you can't get the RAM to go as fast as it's advertised to go. It is, I don't know if it's a power thing, if it's the memory controller address thing tends to be memory controller sometime from the CPU.
Or if it's just a limitation that the chip designers just don't care about because they go, who's going to be putting this much RAM at this high speed in here anyway? Yeah. Not the standard user.
In fact, if you look at the kits, the 4-stick RAM kits, you'll tend to find those are generally either slower than the 2-stick RAM kits. You'll find, like, when we talk about speed, we talk about the numbers 5200, 5600, 6000. That's the DDR5 speed. You'll find the kits tend to be kind of slower. You'll find they'll be on the 5200 and 5600 side. They can't. You put 4 sticks in there, they can't all do the full speed. I had this issue myself with first generation Threadripper. I had 8 RAM slots. 8. And I filled that up with 64 gigs back when, you couldn't get the bigger sticks for that. I had to have all 8 for 64 gigs. And I couldn't get those this is DDR4. I couldn't get those to go any faster than 2800 when these were rated.
To give an example, I'm looking at the Ryzen 9000 series processor. have it on my screen right now, and it says max memory speed, and it gives 4 listings: 2 times 1, 2 times 2, 4 times 1, 4 times 2, and it goes DDR5 5600 for the first 2, and then DDR5 3600 for the second 2.
Yeah, I mean, in theory, I was able to get the 2800 by going into my BIOS and screwing around with the memory settings, and that was the fastest I could get it. Otherwise, it would default to like 2300 or 23, whatever the DDR4 default was. Yeah, I saw Charlie there. It was a pain in the butt. It's gotten better. And you could find larger quantities of RAM in smaller, like I have 2 sticks now for that same 64 gigs that it took me filling 8 slots with before. They were all 8 gig RAM sticks to get 64. That was back in 2017. So it's gotten better with DDR5. Considering you can get 2 stick 64 kits, I would get one of those. You tend to get better speed out of them. That's the only limitation to adding RAM, I can say. Otherwise, yeah, put as much damn RAM you want in there. Do you remember back in the day when we started getting RAM that was just like, we got so much RAM that people would like make a RAM drive to run Windows from? This was way back before we had SSDs. What people would do is they would set up their computer, they would portion off a section of RAM on their computer and turn that into a drive, into it like a readable drive. The only trick there is when the power goes off, it erases itself. So what you would do is the computer would start up and it would copy an installed version of Windows into that RAM drive, and it would run Windows entirely from RAM. It would be incredibly fast, relatively. But yeah, that was back when we're like, we have so much RAM. What are we going to do? I mean, it's kind of pointless these days because SSDs are crazy fast too. So you wouldn't really notice the difference, but yeah. I once had an Apple IIc with a third-party RAM board and software that would set up a ProTOS RAM drive. Those are the days. You could screw around with back in my day. All right. Oh, we got a console question. Oh, this is a rough console question. This is from Jack in Oregon. I have a big problem with my PS5. We were in the process of moving, and either me or my brother dropped the box with the PS5 in. Okay, I just want to pause here. I love that. Either me or my brother dropped the box. Well, which was it? Because you know if you dropped the box, or did you drop a bunch of boxes? That's the only thing did you drop that box? No, I dropped this box.
Multiple boxes have been dropped. We don't know which one we don't know who dropped which one.
When I went to set it up again, it was being weird and we couldn't get it to come on every time. I noticed the HDMI cable was looser than I remember, so in a hunch, I folded up a cardboard box and wedged it underneath where it plugs into the back. That's been working fine ever since, but I know it's not fixed and there's actually something wrong with it. I don't think warranty handles this kind of damage, but is there someone who can fix it? I guess the HDMI port needs to be swapped, but I don't even know how that would be done. Would it be a better idea to replace it, or is what I guess I'm asking? Thanks, Jack in Oregon.
Okay, so I don't feel it's the HDMI port needs replacing it in so much that the connection from the HDMI to the board has gotten damaged. And by wedging that up in cardboard under there, well, I had this not with any sort of modern electronics. I had this with a physical keyboard, as in musical keyboard. The power supply the power supply plug, for whatever reason, came slightly loose off the board. But if you pulled it up, it would connect. And this sounds like the same sort of thing, where there's a slightly damaged connection, but when you physically force it together, it's like, oh, there I am.
It could be that. And that would be the best case scenario. It could be damage inside the socket itself, because HDMI ports are incredibly complicated. I forget, how many twisted pairs is in HDMI? It's something like 60. It's a crazy amount of connections in an HDMI port. It's like HDMI, because technically an HDMI cable is just a really, really complicated network cable. Let me see. How many wires? How many wires? 19, 9 twisted pairs. So that's still a lot. So it could be something in the socket. I take it you've tried another HDMI cable just to be on, because that's, you drop the box with the PS5 in it. So there's good news, bad news. Well, actually a lot of bad news here. It can be fixed, but the PS5, number one, it is incredibly complicated. These are purpose-built systems, and a lot of these things are really form over function. Like Apple would have a field day designing stuff like this. They're made to fit that case and they look a certain way, but that means they've crammed everything in there in a very specific manner. And you'll have to follow. I mean, I wouldn't do this yourself, because I don't know how adept at soldering you are. I'm going to assume not. Getting into a PS5, that's a big job. It takes a long time. There's another problem with trying to fix a PS5, because Sony decided they were going to use liquid metal. The PS5 is it's a PC. It's a really complicated PC. And just like every PC, the CPU needs thermal material between it and the cooler to mate the two surfaces together, because metal is actually uneven on a microscopic level. Most of the stuff that people use for it, thermal paste, or stuff like PTM or thermal pads or PTM 7950, whichever, I forget how the exact name of that. Those are non-conductive interface materials between the heatsink and the CPU. But liquid metal is conductive. And let me see if I can show you what the inside of the PS5. So you see the steps they went in to put this. It's probably one of the most complicated parts of working on a PS5 is dealing with liquid metal, if you're not familiar with it. Here's a perfect image, yes, to get an idea of what you're looking at. This is your brain on drugs. Now, this is the inside of a PS5. This is the CPU, which is an AMD CPU. It's technically a Ryzen CPU after a fashion. The center of it right there, that's liquid metal all over it. What's around it is this sponge type material that is made to contain the liquid metal and keep it from leaking out. When you pull that heatsink off to get at the other components, that liquid metal can go places. And the one thing you don't want is for liquid metal to go places inside electronics. It will bridge connections that were never meant to be bridged. It will, like, if you get enough liquid metal spilled on a motherboard, you've rendered it useless, just simply because turning it on would destroy it. This takes more skill than most repair people have to contend with, because it's just why they did this. They pushed this thing to the limit. It was running so hot within the confines of the box they designed. They had to make sure it would get every single extra ounce of degrees Celsius knocked off. They wanted to get it running, and that's the advantage of liquid metal. Because it is a liquid, because it is metal, it is one of the best thermal transference materials available. Simply put, nothing really beats it. However, we're talking a matter of 5 degrees at most, maybe considerably less compared to some other thermal interface materials. So most people don't use it.
There may be situations where that 5 degrees is really important, but not generally for home use.
Yeah, that 5, I mean, and the other reason they use it is you're not supposed to open it up. Technicians at mostly repair stores are not supposed to open up. Only people who are meant to open this up, as far as Sony is concerned, is Sony. And they have the facilities to deal with this. So what does this mean? Trying to get that HDMI port fixed means disassembling the entire system, potentially dealing with the liquid metal by having to take off the heat sink and the shield and all that. And in doing so, you're going to have find a technician that's capable of doing it. Now, I'm sure there are a bunch of technicians out there who've trained themselves to do it. They make their bones by fixing consoles and stuff. Just understand, this is not a cheap or simple repair.
No.
Just in terms of, I mean, if it's just a matter of resoldering the HDMI port or even using hot air to replace an HDMI port, which can be done. It's a surface mount component, which means it's harder to do with a soldering iron, but they have hot air stations for this. It's going to take it's going to take time, and mainly it's going to be labor charges you're looking at here if someone knows what they're doing. And that's if they know what they're doing. You're going to have to check the reputation of whoever is doing this. You're going to have to look to see how good they are at it. Best Buy is not going to do this.
Yeah, Best Buy's not. Now, a place to look is your cell phone repair places, because it's similar scale electronics, and they may have that as a side business as well in the shop.
Yeah. So, I mean, what's getting at the really irritating thing is getting at the HDMI port itself and either resecuring it or replacing it if it's too badly damaged is the simple part. Even if it is about to say even if it's surface mount, it is a surface mount component. Just to real quick to understand what we mean by surface mount components, there are two types of electronics components installed on a circuit board. The common one used to be something called through hole with the long metal legs on them. And they were literally holes in the motherboard where you stuck those legs through and then you soldered them in place, you cut them loose. The other is surface mount, and this is the cheap and fast way of doing it. They take a big circuit board and a computerized, mechanized system will lay out all the parts on that board. Just lay them in place. And then it goes through, then they heat the whole thing up, solder flows in place, they cool it down, the solder cools, and that's it. They don't have to go through it individually. It's much cheaper, it's much faster, but surface mount is really hard to repair, specifically because it's not meant to be resoldered. It was meant to be done once and done. So surface mount components make repairs take longer. They're doable, but they're just fiddly, and you have to know what you're doing with a hot air station and a microscope, and it's yeah. So get the reputation. You can't. You have to decide how much you're willing to spend on this before getting a new one seems like a better idea. They're still going for like 500 these days, right? Used PS5. What's the price on that? Three. Okay, a used PS5 from GameStop or somewhere is 400, right? And a new one.
I mean, a new one is 450.
New one's 450. So honestly, I'd say if the repair goes past, if the repair starts to approach $300, it's not worth it.
Yeah,
I would say.
I mean, I'd probably bail at 200, but that's me.
Probably bail at 200 because you have to count on the people repairing it to know what they're doing. So it's So, and most of the repair cost is going to be labor cost because, yeah. So you have to decide if that's worth it to you. But
and if you're sure it's your brother, make him pay for it.
Yeah, he says as a triplet. He has 3 brothers, 2 of which are part of the triplets.
And I'm absolutely sure which of them have broken. Well, okay, no, I can't say that. I am absolutely certain all of the stuff of mine that has been broken, which was broken by me and which was not.
All right, we'll do one more check, see if we got anything else in, but I think that's going to do it for this week. Yep, that will in fact do it. Folks, thank you for your questions. Please keep them coming. Send those to requests@radiodeadair.com or comment in the YouTube section under this video. Super appreciate it. We'll be back next week, Saturday, 9 p.m. Eastern. More stuff. In the meanwhile, thank you so much for being here, and we will see you next time. Good night, everybody.